Hi, I'm Grace Garrison, and I lead LinkedIn Sales Solutions for Asia Pacific. Welcome to Take the Lead Executive Series, where we bring you insightful conversations from thought leaders across Asia Pacific. Today's episode is themed Winning in New Frontiers. And joining me is an industry thought leader who is doing just that for one of the world's biggest brands. Please welcome Rajeev Menon, President of Marriott International Asia Pacific. Raj, welcome to Take the Lead.
Thank you, Grace.
Now, before we get started, let's get the audience to get to know you a little bit better. Is it okay if we can do a couple of rapid fire questions? Favorite family holiday destination, winter skiing or summer vacation by the beach?
So I would take both, and that's what we just did. We were at our beach house in Sydney for Christmas and New Year, then flew across to Japan on the 2nd of January to Niseko and did a few days of skiing before coming back to Singapore.
By the way, I was in Niseko on January 2nd for the week, skiing in the Grand Harafu. So there you go.
We were there
Didn't
together.
see each other, but
Yes.
we were at the same place. Cricket, tennis, or a different sport?
Well, tennis. I play a fair bit of tennis because it's just so much easier. Cricket takes a lot longer. I used to play a lot of cricket, love golf, but just the time is a challenge.
Raj, 30 years in the hospitality and hotel sector. That is a lot of changes that you would have seen. So can you tell us a little bit about that, your journey?
Well, a lot has changed over these 30 years. And as we were starting up our career, really when you thought about travel, it was, at least in the Asia context or India context particularly, it was either at uber luxury level at 5-star hotels, or it was really guest houses. But as we've seen the world open up, for all the centuries that human beings have been traveling, it was only in 2012 that 1 billion people crossed borders.
Wow.
And now, because of COVID, we've had a little bit of a setback, but we are, I think by the end of this year, we'll be back to about 1.4 to 1.5 billion crossing borders. What has been very interesting to watch is the emergence of Asia Pacific. How Asia is now pretty much the part of the world that has most people going out and traveling within. Given well north of 50% of the world's population is based here in Asia Pacific, people are acquiring more and more wealth. And you see China outbound became the number one outbound market in the world from travel perspective. India is fast catching up, and that transformation has just been interesting to watch. The second thing for me is really how technology has come along in our business and how industry at large has adopted to technology and really in delivering great customer experiences and making life easier for our associates that deliver those experiences. The third piece for me that's been interesting to watch is the changes in consumer preferences. People today are more focused on personalized experiences and spending more on experiences versus only a few years ago when they were spending more on white goods or cars or things from buying home point of view. But today that has shifted dramatically. And then finally, sustainable travel. How sustainability is now such a big focus point for the world, and any company like Marriott, it's a business imperative.
It's such a diverse region that we have. And one of the things that you spoke about is the importance of hyperlocalization. And so can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so as a company, from Marriott's perspective, we are 97 years old this year.
Wow.
And we'll be celebrating our 100 years in 2027. So when you think about our journey, we've now been in Asia for about 50 years. But as I joined the company some 23 years ago, from my perspective, travel was still evolving. I was lucky enough to open the second Marriott hotel in India, having moved back from Australia as I joined Marriott.
And now let me stop there. How many hotels do you now have, or properties do you now have in India?
Well, close to 150 open hotels.
It's amazing.
So I think the key focus for us as a company over the years has, when you think about travel, in the past, we were heavily reliant on travelers from the West, typically. Domestic travel would be a very small portion of our overall guest mix. But as things have evolved over the years, domestic travel and intra-regional travel has become a key component of what drives us in the region. So to put it in perspective, 61% of our business today is coming from either domestic or intra-regional travel. So for us to be successful, you have to be very focused on the local customers.
Can you give me an example of that?
So I'll give you a few examples. First, as a company, we've learned, we used to traditionally talk to everybody in English. When you think about today, my world of 21 countries is very, very diverse. They are from Japan to Korea to Vietnam. All of these countries have their own languages. People prefer to interact in their language. So we've had to adapt. And today, we have a number of languages that we communicate with our customers in, be it Bahasa, Indonesia, Thai, Vietnamese, Japanese, Korean, and we're going to launch Hindi this year. So we've been adapting, and this goes back to this focus around hyperlocalization, because as Asia continues to evolve, you cannot take any country or any market for granted and say, oh, they're just going to figure out what works in the West is going to work here. You really have to adapt your brands, the way you communicate, the way you engage with the customer, and even associates to some degree. So I vividly remember about 15 years ago when we were looking at bringing one of our very successful brands, Fairfield, into Asia, into India particularly at that time. We did a lot of research, and in the US, Fairfield is positioned as Fairfield Inn. Whereas when we did the research in India with the customers, it was very clear that Inn didn't have the best connotation. So we actually positioned the brand as Fairfield by Marriott, and has been very successful. We also figured out, now if you think of our Fairfields back in the US, there is a breakfast option available from a food and beverage offering point of view. But when we did the research, it was very clear that the Indian customer, expected some kind of a delivery to the room. They expected a facility in the hotel itself in terms of a restaurant. So we created all of those just to make sure that we were catering to our consumer. And today, when you think about it, over 80% of our customers using these hotels are locals. And hence, based on all this research and all this adaptability, we've been fairly successful. So that's just a couple of quick examples of how one needs to be very, very focused on the nuances of each of these markets, on what the customer expects, what the associates expects, and be able to tailor your product in a particular way.
Hyperlocalization also worked for you during COVID because the tourism, the hospitality sector was impacted heavily. And obviously from a leadership perspective, every leader had to change and really pivot and adapt. So are you able to cover off just a couple of things around that? You as a leader, but then how did the business fare during COVID?
So COVID was single-handedly the most difficult time for our industry in the last 100 years and for pretty much every individual that worked in the industry. And for me as a leader, it was also an incredible learning journey. I'm blessed to have a great team around me. We've always been focused on empowerment. But the three examples I'll share with you would reiterate this focus around hyperlocalization, or for that matter, what it means when you've got teams that are empowered to make decisions. So for us, as part of the Starwood acquisition, we had made a decision early on to really put our teams closest to our markets. And what we had done traditionally, Starwood would run Asia Pacific out of Singapore. Marriott was running Asia Pacific out of Hong Kong. But as we came together, we actually set up offices in many markets across Asia Pacific and put full teams on the ground, be it in Japan, Korea, in Seoul, Bangkok, in Sydney, Australia, in Jakarta, and 3 offices in India. Obviously, Singapore and Hong Kong still remain, fairly big hubs for us. As we went into COVID, for us, having those teams on the ground was just godsend, because our teams could make very quick decisions. They were in the market, could engage with every stakeholder, and just help us navigate through this crisis, which, there was no book in the world that would have helped us plan for something like that. So just continuing on that journey. So as we had these teams spread across Asia Pacific, the other challenge we faced was every market reacted to handling COVID differently. So when you looked at what the Australian government did versus what the Singapore government did, or what Indonesian or Vietnamese government did, were entirely different. Even as we worked with many government leaders to kind of try to bring them together, it was very clear the governments were focused single-handedly on first safety and security of their own people, and tourism was kind of put on the back burner. So as a result, having these teams on the ground, from my perspective, really helped us navigate through the crisis. But when you think about large companies, we push innovation down. For the first time, we saw innovation ground up.
Amazing.
Case in point, in Australia, Singapore, there was lots of government support for our associates. In places like Indonesia or Vietnam or India, there was little to no government support. So, our talent acquisition teams ended up becoming talent outsourcing team. These folks basically looked at and took the resumes of all the individuals that we were, and unfortunately had to let go, and went to our partner companies who were aggressively hiring other S&P 500s, and basically offered, these folks to shift career. And many of them found themselves jobs. Now that COVID is behind us, we're also able to bring 5,000 of this alumni back into our hotels, which is incredible. And then other things like, where customers could not come to us, we figured out a way to get to our customers. So Marriott Bonvoy on Wheels was just one example where our restaurants from our hotels started delivering food to our customers at their homes. And, it just made me so proud to see this play out in different regions. And if we were trying to do all of this from Singapore, it would have been very difficult. But because our teams were on the ground, they could understand the needs of the market, they could engage with the stakeholders, and they could respond very, very quickly.
That's amazing. You said earlier that COVID has taught you a lot, but that you've also seen a lot of changes in the region over the past 25, 30 years. So tell me, what has been your leadership journey?
I've had an amazing career over the last many, many years, over 3 decades now. And one of the things in my journey I've learned is also from different markets. So I continue to say, as I spend my time early on in India, in the industry, India truly taught me hospitality. And then as a young boy, 23-year-old, when I moved to Australia, it was one of the toughest times. This is back in early 1992, when Australia, the US were facing one of the worst recessions they had seen. And at that time, as I showed up, I gave some 25 interviews, got rejected of every single one of them because there were no opportunities for the Aussies. And, who would give an opportunity to somebody who had just come off the plane? But through perseverance, I managed to get a job and then, built my career. But Australia, for me, really taught me resource management. And over many, many years, I have always been a strong believer that it is more about a team than an individual. So for me as a leader, it's critically important to always have a great team around me, to nurture talent, build a talent pool that you're always growing from within. The other thing that's always been important to me is ability to sit down and listen. As leaders, often we are so focused in listening to our own voice that we forget what, the teams often have the answers to most of the questions. So this piece around COVID or other times, if you genuinely are dealing with a challenging issue, to open it up and ask questions and just sit and listen as to what the teams think we should be doing. And often you can find the answer. And finally, as a leader, for me, it's about, not just the vision, but ability to make a decision. Often leaders would hold back from decision making. For me, sometimes when you're in tough positions like we were during COVID, as a leader, you had to make decisions. Not every decision you made was the right decision, but at least you could continue to move forward. And you have to be very focused as a leader to communicate aggressively, particularly in tough situations like COVID, because I did see many folks just kind of hide behind a wall because people really didn't know what to do. Or you could just come out and say, listen, hey, we don't have all the answers, but these are the 3 or 5 things we are going to do, and hopefully that'll help us navigate through the crisis.
So from a LinkedIn perspective, we're seeing something that is an inflection point that other markets are not seeing yet. And that is a demographic change. So close to 70% of our 277 million members in APAC are millennials and Gen Z. And as you said, is understanding the preference, that changing preference is really critical.
Technology is changing at a rapid pace. Marriott has been always an early adopter in terms of overall tech. 10 years ago, when e-commerce was really taking shape, Marriott used to be one of the top 10 companies from a revenue generation point of view, based on how much revenue came through Marriott.com, right? When you think about Amazons of the world and so on, we were right up there. And it was purely because we were heavily invested in keeping our site, our mobile app, and other bits of technology up to date, so that as consumer preferences were shifting, we were able to gain early lead on these shifting patterns. Now, similarly, as AI comes to play, we have AI incubator back in our corporate office, in our digital lab, where we are spending a lot of time with associates who are very passionate around this issue, but also partners who are helping us just do a lot of back-end work to be ready and start to at least use it in back of the house. So I'll give you a simple example. When customers call our CEC offices, and by CEC I mean customer engagement centers around the world to make reservations, and you talked about personalized experience. Today, consumers are very clear on what they expect, and they have the minutest detail laid out. It would take a typical customer engagement center agent a lot of time, maybe 5, 8, 10 minutes, to kind of search out every aspect of this journey or personalized experience that the customer would expect. But thanks to AI that we are already using, our associates can actually get the information, in seconds, and then spend the rest of the time actually really engaging with the customer, building a personal rapport, and being able to tailor make things for them that really makes them feel special. So that's just one example of how we are seeing the shift, how we are adopting to the shift. Another example is Marriott Bonvoy. You talked about how big your base is around the world. Marriott today has close to 195 million Marriott Bonvoy members around the world. Our growth in Asia Pacific, particularly ex-China, we've seen a 50% surge in membership since 2019 alone. And again, customers are not, really focused on those traditional ways of burning points. They want instant rewards. So we talked about having been at Australian Open.
Yeah.
Our Marriott Bonvoy customers just burned some 14 million points in bidding for experiences that really money can't buy.
Wow.
Spending time with the players, walking the back of the house, and doing things that you all can just dream of.
Yep.
And again, a lot of it is driven by our ability to understand what our members want through the data that we continue to see based on their travel patterns and the feedback we get from them. We also see the shift happening in terms of demographics, right? With the millennials coming along, their expectations changing, and we continue to adapt ourselves to that shift.
LinkedIn and Marriott International has a great partnership in which data and insights and technology is underpinned by that. Can you tell us a little bit more about your point of view on how you're using and what your thoughts are about LinkedIn?
LinkedIn is a great platform for us to be part of a broader community, to engage as people share ideas, talk about innovation, as we continue to partner with you to see work that you're doing around data analytics, various trends that are shaping the world today. From my perspective, just a simple thing like sustainability as an example. It's incredible to see the shift. Now, only back in 2020, we launched Good Travel with Marriott Bonvoy because what we were starting to see was that consumer preferences towards sustainable travel had changed dramatically, starting to come, out of COVID. That's the kind of support we get from LinkedIn, which makes it special as a partnership. So from our perspective, thank you for what you do every day. And it really makes, helps us to just get better based on some of this information that you continue to share with us.
Thank you, Raj. And thank you for being on the episode of Take the Lead.
Thank you.